Imagine a 60-year-old cold case just sitting quietly in a drawer at the Natural History Museum in London.
Just collecting dust.
Literally collecting dust. It's this set of fossilized skull fragments. They are, incredibly fragile, dusty, and for decades, nobody really knew what to do with them.
Right.
So these fragments are known as Kabua 1, and they were discovered in Turkana, Kenya. Welcome to this custom deep dive where you and I are going to finally dust off this forgotten fossil.
It's about time, honestly.
Yeah, it is. We're basically going on a scientific rescue mission today. We're going to look at how researchers are using cutting-edge technology and data science to answer a really massive question.
Which is, what did our species actually look like before severe genetic bottlenecks narrowed down human diversity?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it is quite the cold case.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the whole reason it sat in that drawer for so long is that, anatomically speaking, it fundamentally broke the prevailing rules of taxonomy.
The paradox of Kabua 1. Let's go back to 1960 when T. Whitworth first discovered it. You look at the physical contradiction of this skull, and it's just striking.
It really is. It's a total mosaic.
Right, because on one hand, you have this suite of incredibly archaic features. I mean, the cranial vault walls are immensely thick. The frontal bone, the forehead, is heavily sloped.
Very primitive looking.
Yeah, and the jaw is robustly built in a way that points back to much older ancestors, like Homo heidelbergensis.
But then you look at the anterior of the lower jaw.
Yes. Right on the lower jaw, there is this prominent, fully developed mental eminence.
A modern chin.
A modern chin.
Oh?
And a true chin is like one of the absolute defining diagnostic markers of our species, Homo sapiens.
And Whitworth was, frankly, thoroughly confused by that mosaic. I mean, his field notes completely reflect that. He documented the archaic vault, he documented the modern chin, and he essentially admitted he just couldn't resolve the contradiction.
He didn't know what to do with it.
Exactly. Because the fossil didn't fit cleanly into a single linear evolutionary box, it was quietly filed away. It was largely ignored by the broader paleoanthropological community.
Which is such a shame.
It is. The analytical trap here is thinking that the difficulty in classifying Kabua 1 represents a failure of the researcher. But in reality, that difficulty is the data.
That's a great way to put it.
Biological reality often defies the neat little taxonomic bins we try to force it into.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if the morphological contradiction is the actual story here, we have to figure out how to read it without, our own biases getting in the way.
Right, which brings us to the modern-day scientific rescue mission.
Yeah, because you can't just take these 60-year-old fragments and physically glue them back together.
No, absolutely not. They are highly fragmented, and they've been crushed and distorted by tens of thousands of years of sitting under tons of earth.
Just massive pressure.
Exactly. Taphonomic distortion is really the bane of paleoanthropology. The pressure, the moisture, the shifting of the earth over millennia, it physically warps the actual geometry of the bone.
So if you try to put it together like a normal puzzle.
If you physically force those warped pieces to fit together using adhesives, you end up propagating errors across the entire skull. You create a shape that never actually existed in nature.
Wow, so you'd essentially be fabricating a new fossil by accident.
Exactly. So to bypass this, a team led by Abel Marinus Bosman took a completely virtual approach.
Oh, nice.
They used high-resolution micro-CT scans to digitize each individual fragment. That allowed them to correct for the taphonomic warping in a 3D digital space.
But here's where I have to pause and really look closely at their methodology.
Ooh.
Because the team didn't just make one digital reconstruction.
No, they didn't.
They generated 6 completely separate virtual reconstructions. And they did this by using 6 different reference crania to guide the digital assembly.
That's right.
But wait, if you're missing pieces of a puzzle,
Yeah.
and you guess the missing shapes based on the picture of a completely different puzzle, aren't you just engineering the outcome?
That's a very fair question.
Like, if I use a modern human skull as a template to fill in the gaps of Kabua 1,
Yeah.
I'm virtually guaranteeing that the final product will look like a modern human, right?
You are identifying the exact methodological hazard the researchers were actively working to neutralize.
Okay, so how did they avoid that?
Well, if they had selected a single reference skull, they would have baked an extreme confirmation bias into the architecture of the reconstruction.
Right.
By choosing 6 vastly different reference crania, they established a rigorous spectrum of possibilities. They utilized models spanning from the heavily archaic Middle Pleistocene Kabua 1 skull all the way through to recent modern Maasai individuals.
Oh, I see. So they're essentially testing the limits of the bone fragments.
Exactly.
They're pulling the geometry in every possible evolutionary direction to see where the physical constraints of the fragments just, refuse to bend anymore.
In statistical terms, this functions very similarly to establishing priors in a Bayesian framework.
Okay, break that down for us.
You are testing the probability space of different morphological outcomes based on prior knowledge, the reference skulls, without artificially committing to a single solution.
That makes a lot of sense.
It is an epistemically honest way to handle fragmentary data. We don't get one definitive Kabua 1. We get a distribution of 6 possible geometric shapes, and then we analyze that entire distribution.
Okay, so we have these 6 digital ghosts of Kabua 1 floating in virtual space. Now we need to see how they stack up against the rest of human history.
And to do that, the team focused heavily on the shape of the human brain case.
Because morphology gives us our strongest clues.
Precisely. Specifically, the researchers evaluated neurocranial globularity.
Neurocranial globularity, that sounds intense.
It's a mouthful, but it's crucial. This isn't just about the skull being round. It's a very specific developmental trajectory.
How so?
Well, in modern Homo sapiens, during the first year of life, the brain undergoes a rapid, massive expansion in the parietal and cerebellar regions.
Oh, so right after birth.
Right. This unique growth pattern actually alters the angle of the cranial base and forces the brain case into a tall, short, globular shape.
Okay.
Older hominins, like Neanderthals or Homo erectus, they completely lack this specific developmental phase.
So what does that mean for their skull shape?
It results in skulls that are lower and much more elongated front to back. So if you want to know if a fossil is a derived Homo sapiens, globularity is your primary diagnostic metric.
Got it. So the researchers take these 6 digital Kabua 1 reconstructions and run them through a principal component analysis, or PCA.
Which is a fantastic tool for this.
Yeah, for anyone unfamiliar, PCA is essentially a dimensionality reduction tool. A skull has hundreds of complex geometric landmarks, right?
Hundreds, yes. It's overwhelming spatial data.
So PCA condenses all that data into a few key axes of maximum variance, allowing us to plot complex 3D shapes on a simple 2D graph. And on the first axis, PC1, which primarily captures that neurocranial globularity you just described, all 6 of the Kabua 1 reconstructions fall squarely within the cluster of modern Homo sapiens.
That's the big takeaway from PC1. Based on that primary developmental signature, Kabua 1 clusters with us. The parietal expansion is clearly there.
Okay. The PCA has a second axis, PC2, and that axis reveals the true mosaic nature of this fossil.
Yes, PC2 is where things get really complicated.
Because while the overall brain case is globular, PC2 highlights that Kabua 1 also features a remarkably short neutral plane at the base of the skull, a retreating, less vertical frontal bone, and a vault that is incredibly narrow from side to side.
Very archaic traits.
Yeah, and those specific traits forcefully pull Kabua 1 out of the modern cluster and right back into the archaic overlap area. It's basically an anatomical contradiction mapped out in data.
And that contradiction becomes even more pronounced when we look at how different classification algorithms attempted to categorize the skull.
Oh, the algorithm battle. This is fascinating.
The researchers basically set up a battle between classical statistical models and modern machine learning to see how a computer interprets this mosaic of features.
Right. So first, they deployed a linear discriminant analysis, or LDA. And I want to dig into how that actually works, because an LDA doesn't evaluate a skull the way a human anatomist does.
Not at all. An LDA tries to draw strict, straight boundary lines between different categories, like archaic versus modern, based on the linear combination of features.
And because Kabua 1 has those prominent archaic hangovers, like the sloped forehead and the narrow vault, the LDA couldn't reconcile the mosaic.
It totally failed to handle it.
It classified 5 out of the 6 reconstructions as Middle Pleistocene African. It essentially declared Kabua 1 an archaic human ancestor.
The LDA struggled because, as you said, it relies on rigid class separation. A mosaic fossil, by definition, straddles those boundaries.
So what did they do next?
They brought in the machine learning algorithms, specifically random forest and k-nearest neighbor.
Okay, so how does a random forest model handle this differently than the LDA?
It works completely differently. A random forest model builds hundreds of individual decision trees. One tree might evaluate the angle of the frontal bone, another might evaluate the presence of the mental eminence, the chin, and another looks at the parietal expansion.
So it's looking at all the pieces independently.
Yes. Each tree casts a vote, and the algorithm aggregates those votes, and then the k-nearest neighbor algorithm plots the fossil in multidimensional space and literally looks at the classification of the data points physically closest to it.
And the results from those machine learning models are amazing because they actually change their minds based on the volume of data they were fed.
The sensitivity to sample size is the key revelation here. It's huge.
How so?
When the machine learning models were trained on a small, limited data set of modern humans, they were conflicted about Kabua 1. They often grouped it with archaic specimens.
Just like the LDA.
Exactly. But as the researchers expanded the training data, feeding the algorithms a massive, highly diverse sample of modern Homo sapiens crania from all over the globe, the AI increasingly classified Kabua 1 as a modern human.
Wow. So by showing the computer just how wild and expansive modern human variation can be, the algorithm realized that Kabua 1 could technically fit within the extreme outer limits of our species.
Yes. The more data the AI had on the true morphological breadth of Homo sapiens, the more it recognized Kabua 1 not as a different species, but as a heavily derived modern human possessing traits that are just exceedingly rare today.
So if I'm synthesizing this data, the algorithm is telling us this is not a Neanderthal.
No.
It is not Homo heidelbergensis. It is one of us.
It is.
But if this specific individual walked into a room full of recent modern humans today, their bone structure would be jarringly distinct.
They would definitely stand out.
We have a skull with modern developmental globularity, a modern chin, but a heavily archaic brow and vault structure. But if a machine learning model tells us this mosaic fossil belongs in the modern human cluster, the entire significance of the discovery pivots on a single question.
When did this person actually live?
Exactly. Chronology is everything.
A mosaic skull from 300,000 years ago tells a very, very different evolutionary story than a mosaic skull from 30,000 years ago.
Which brings us to the monumental challenge of dating Kabua 1. Radiocarbon dating is totally useless here, right?
Completely useless. Carbon-14 has a half-life of about 5,700 years. That means any biological carbon in the bone decayed away tens of thousands of years ago.
So to get it date, the team had to rely on a different radioactive clock. Uranium-series dating.
Right, and uranium-series dating leverages the behavior of isotopes in groundwater.
Okay, tell us how that works.
When a bone is buried, uranium-238 from the surrounding soil and water slowly seeps into the porous structure of the fossil. Over time, that uranium decays into a daughter isotope, thorium-230, at a known, completely predictable rate.
And bone doesn't naturally have thorium in it, right?
Exactly. Because bone naturally contains 0 thorium when the creature dies, measuring the ratio of uranium to thorium provides a highly accurate chronological clock. You are calculating exactly how long that bone has been absorbing isotopes from the Earth.
In a closed system, that sounds like a perfectly elegant solution.
It really does.
But a fossil bed in Kenya is not a closed system. The deep time environment is chaotic.
It's very chaotic.
The massive headache with uranium-series dating is uranium mobility, right? Like, if the climate shifts and the water table drops, the uranium can actually leach back out of the bone.
Yes. Or, conversely, thousands of years later, a completely new wave of groundwater can wash over the fossil, depositing a fresh batch of uranium.
Which completely scrambles the isotopic ratio.
It does. You don't just have a clock anymore. You have a clock that someone keeps arbitrarily rewinding.
And the researchers encountered exactly that chaotic behavior when they first attempted to date a tooth from the Kabua 1 jaw.
Oh, sample 3528. It was an absolute chronological nightmare.
What happened with it?
The isotopic analysis revealed that this single tooth had suffered through at least 3 distinct mobilization events. It absorbed uranium initially, then suffered a massive leaching event where the isotopes were washed out, followed by a secondary overprint where a new wave of uranium entered the dental tissue much, much later.
Wow.
The open system behavior just rendered the tooth mathematically useless for dating.
It was basically put through a geological wash cycle.
That's exactly what happened.
So they move away from the jaw, and they test a temporal bone fragment. And that gives them a calculated age of roughly 114,000 years old.
Yeah.
But the chemical signature of that fragment still showed evidence of past leaching.
Right. It wasn't pristine. And in geochronology, if you suspect leaching, you simply cannot publish that date as definitive. You have to be conservative to maintain the integrity of the timeline.
So what was the final verdict?
The team ultimately relied on a third sample extracted from the biparietal occipital fragment, which is the thick back portion of the skull.
And the isotopic profile on that piece was entirely different, wasn't it?
It showed a beautifully clean, simple accumulation history.
Oh, that's a relief.
Yeah, the density of the cranial vault bone acted as a natural shield. There was no evidence of leaching, no secondary uptake. It functioned as a nearly closed system, providing a highly defensible, conservative minimum age.
And that rigorous analysis gave them a minimum age of 64.4 thousand years old, with a margin of error of 5.4 thousand years.
Yes. It is entirely possible the fossil is older, perhaps pushing back toward that 114,000-year mark, but we can confidently state it is at least 64,000 years old.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if we plug that date into the broader narrative of human evolution, the implications are just staggering.
They really are.
64,000 years ago places Kabua 1 squarely in the late Pleistocene. This is the precise, critical window when Homo sapiens populations in Africa were preparing for the major demographic expansions that would eventually populate the rest of the globe.
It is the eve of global human migration.
And Kabua 1 is sitting in East Africa looking incredibly robust and stubbornly archaic.
By locking in that late Pleistocene date, Kabua 1 ceases to be just an isolated anomaly. It actively joins a very specific, fiercely debated group of fossils that paleoanthropologists have been struggling to explain for decades.
Welcome to the late Pleistocene Misfit Club.
It's quite a club.
It is. The African continent during this era is just dotted with fossils that look tens of thousands of years older than they actually are. Let's look at the other members of this club, because it proves Kabua 1 isn't just a fluke.
Right, it's part of the pattern.
For example, you have the Iwo Eleru skull from Nigeria. It dates to a mere 14,000 years ago, which is practically yesterday in evolutionary terms. I mean, humans were already domesticating dogs by then.
Yeah, 14,000 years is extremely recent.
Yet Iwo Eleru possesses a radically elongated low cranial vault that aggressively mimics the shape of much older archaic humans.
And then you have the Hofmeyr skull from South Africa.
Yes, dated to about 36,000 years ago. Hofmeyr features a continuous, heavy, supraorbital torus, a massive brow ridge that is extraordinarily rare in humans of that era.
And we see similar robusticity in Nazlicator II from Egypt, which is also around 36,000 years old, and features an incredibly heavy, primitive jaw structure.
So geographically, these fossils span the entire length and breadth of the African continent, and temporally, they are scattered across tens of thousands of years.
They do not represent a single, unified, archaic tribe living in secret or something.
Right. What connects them is their shared retention of primitive morphological traits. Traits that linear, straight-line models of human evolution dictate should have been completely smoothed out, rounded off, and bred out of existence by the late Pleistocene.
Which forces a massive structural question.
Let's hear it.
If you look at human populations outside of Africa today, whether in Europe, Asia, or the Americas, there is a relatively narrow band of morphological variation.
Yeah, you don't see populations walking around with heavy continuous brow ridges or extremely elongated cranial vaults.
But the fossil record shows that Africa, right up until the end of the Pleistocene, was teeming with these extreme physical variations. So why did the African continent hold on to this deep past while the rest of the world looks so uniform?
Well, it comes down to demographic bottlenecks and the concept of founder effects, doesn't it?
Exactly. Every indigenous living population outside of Africa today traces its lineage back to a remarkably small founding group of humans that migrated out of the continent roughly 60,000 years ago.
Right around the time of Kabua 1.
Yes. And when that small group left, they acted as a genetic funnel. They carried only a tiny random fraction of the total phenotypic variation that existed in Africa at the time.
And then, as those populations migrated across harsh new environments, they endured subsequent genetic bottlenecks, further compressing their physical variation.
They were heavily filtered by migration. Living African populations today maintain significantly more genetic and phenotypic diversity than non-African populations, precisely because they didn't pass through that out-of-Africa funnel.
But what Kabua 1 and the rest of this Misfit Club demonstrate is that even the diversity we see in Africa today is a shadow of what used to exist.
It's true. The pre-bottleneck range of human morphology was vastly wider than anything currently existing on Earth. The fossils are giving us a glimpse of the unfiltered Homo sapiens.
And that unfiltered morphological variance is really the core of the current debate in paleoanthropology, isn't it?
It is. Scientists are trying to understand the population dynamics that produce these diverse fossils, and it generally splits into two competing models.
The first being the Pan-African origins model.
Right.
Under this theory, Kabua 1 isn't an archaic throwback, it's just a local flavor. The model suggests that Homo sapiens didn't evolve in one specific, isolated Eden.
Instead, our species emerged as a vast, interconnected metapopulation across the entire African continent.
And populations were occasionally isolated by ecological barriers, right? Like the Sahara turning into a hyper-arid desert.
Exactly. That isolation allowed them to develop deep regional quirks and robust features. But when the climate shifted and the Sahara became green again, those populations reconnected, they migrated and exchanged genes.
It was a continent-wide network of deep diversity continuously folding back in on itself.
Exactly the mechanism. The Pan-African model views fossils like Kabua 1, Iwo Eleru, and Hofmeyr as evidence of these deep, surviving regional lineages contributing to the broader human gene pool.
But then there is the contrasting theory.
Yes, the single region replacement model. This argues that the core, highly derived traits of modern humans, the very rounded skulls, the lighter facial structures, evolved in one specific location, perhaps Eastern or Southern Africa.
And that highly derived population then expanded outward, both across Africa and eventually the globe. So if the single region model is correct, then how do we explain the Misfit Club? Under that model, Kabua 1 and Iwo Eleru aren't contributing to the modern gene pool, they are evolutionary ghosts.
Precisely. They represent isolated, relict populations that were eventually outcompeted or genetically swamped by the expanding, lighter-built humans.
They were basically edge cases that represent dead-end branches of the family tree.
They represent populations that ultimately went extinct without leaving a significant genetic signature in living humans today. And the deep frustration for researchers is that the definitive tool for solving this debate is completely out of reach.
Ancient DNA.
Yes. Ancient DNA is fundamentally inaccessible for these specific specimens.
Because Kabua 1 was found in an equatorial environment. The heat, the fluctuating humidity, the extreme taphonomic conditions we discussed earlier, it absolutely shreds genetic material.
It is exceedingly improbable that we will ever extract a viable endogenous DNA sequence from Kabua 1.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. We cannot simply run a genetic test to see if its descendants are walking around today. The morphology of the bone is the only ledger we have.
Which perfectly frames why this specific deep dive into the virtual reconstruction and the machine learning algorithms is so vital. If the bones are all we have to extract every ounce of data from their geometry.
We really do.
I mean, we started with a dusty, shattered collection of fragments, completely ignored for decades because it violated the textbook definition of what a human was supposed to look like.
And now it has been virtually resurrected to prove that the true story of human evolution is messy, complex, and deeply nonlinear.
Kabua 1 is a survivor from an era when the definition of a modern human encompassed a wild, broad spectrum of physical forms.
Interrogating anomalies is the foundation of scientific advancement. We possess a natural bias toward clean categories and straight-line narratives, but rigorous analysis requires us to confront the fossils that refuse to fit. Kabua 1 forces the realization that our modern comparative frameworks, or strict definitions of what looks human, are constructed from a compressed, bottleneck slice of what Homo sapiens actually was.
The Pleistocene reality was infinitely more diverse than our modern present.
Without a doubt.
And that leaves us with a truly provocative reality to consider. If strict environmental bottlenecks and massive founder effects filtered out so much of the extreme morphological diversity seen in the heavy brows and robust vaults of skulls like Kabua 1 and Iwo Eleru, what else did the human species lose in those bottlenecks?
It's a staggering thought.
What other incredible physical traits, extreme environmental adaptations, or unique physiological capabilities did our early Homo sapiens ancestors possess that have been entirely wiped from the global gene pool today? We are left to wonder what other ghosts of human potential are sitting right now, unrecognized and misunderstood, in a dark drawer at a museum.